All right, so we get started. Welcome. This is a getting started session with Port, understanding how you can build a portal. What is a portal and why do we need portals in our lives? My name is Matar Peles. I'm a solution engineer in Port. I'll introduce myself a bit and then we'll move to the agenda of this session and what we're going to cover. During the session, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in our chat. We'll have a dedicated time at the end for your questions. And also I try to pick up some questions every once in a while to make sure I understand what is missing for you during this presentation. Let's get started. So what are we going to cover today? I'll tell a bit about myself and then we'll talk about what is Port, how the internal developer portals are involved in the platform engineering journey, and how Port can help you during this process, how Port is easy for you as a tool for building an internal developer portal. Then we'll demonstrate that by creating your first service catalog. In about 20 minutes, we're going to create a service catalog, integrate it with GitHub, Kubernetes workflows, and also Jira. So we'll have everything in one place, and then we'll talk about some few next steps for us to do to make this portal ready and completed. And then we'll talk about, in the end, how can we decide and how should we design the beginning of your portal journey? What should you focus first when you talk about internal developer portal in your organization? Then we'll have some time for Q&As. So a bit about myself. In my origins, I'm a software engineer, and also I'm a former DevOps team lead. I was actually a platform team lead, but back then there was no such thing as platform engineering. I was providing big data services, platforms as a service to different data engineers. I also managed a course of young developers, helping them to learn to be I was the first one to tell them like how to code and help training them. And in my free time, I like to play basketball, to lift weights, and I'm a huge fan of iced Americanos. If you need a recipe, I'm your guy. Let's move to talk about internal developer portals. If you look at this slide, you're probably familiar with some of the tech stack on the right side of this slide. So we have the different platforms that you have in your engineering organization, you know, the cloud, the runtime environment of your applications. It can be Argo, it can be Kubernetes, it can be also some cloud environment. And you have the different, in general, tech stack your developers and your engineering organization are using. These tools are not necessarily that straightforward to use. Each tool has its own learning curve, has its own best practices of how to use it. And when developers need to leverage the capabilities of these different tools, the learning curve tends to be a bit high. It tends to be a bit hard to involve it as part of your day. And for a new developer, it might get it stuck. And then we have in the organization some teams providing services on top of these different platforms. For example, a DevOps team, a cloud team, a platform team. And the idea is that as we see on the left side, we have the different personas on our engineering organization, and we have all the different platforms. And we can use an internal developer portal as a connecting bridge between these platforms and these personas. The idea is, for example, developers have their own routines during the day. They need to release a new feature. They need to manage an incident. And they need to use a lot of platforms and have context from many places to do it in the best way. The idea is that internal developer portals will give them the best experience to actually handle the situation in the fastest and most effective way. It can be developers, dev managers, VP of engineering, DevOps, and also CISO. So it can be different domain owners or users from your engineering organization. So this is the initial vision of internal developer portal, as it is being the core of platform engineering itself. Internal developer portal are something that is coming as a key concept in the platform engineering journey of different companies. I want to move to what is actually a portal, like what are the main pillars, specifically in Port. that a portal can provide. So we're talking about four main pillars when we're talking about a portal. The two main one, I guess, are the software catalog and the self-service. Software catalog talking about your ability to create an inventory of your software components. I can see in one place all the information I need to release a feature to production. All the context I need is there. I can see my microservices, their architecture. I can understand where they are deployed. I can understand who is their owners and how is the CI/CD process for this application works. Everything I need in one place to understand most of my different resources in one place. This is the software catalog. And then we talk about self-service, which allows you to create self-service sections to run from the portal. Self-service sections can be scaffolding a new service, creating a new cloud resource, triggering a PagerDuty incident. Everything that I need to, every action I need to perform can be provided through a very abstracted and easy to use form from the portal that behind the scenes will trigger an automation that the platform engineering team is owning. So self-service gives you the ability to provide self-service capabilities to your developers. This is software catalog and self-service. And then we have two pillars that are a bit more advanced, I would say. We have scorecards, uh, which allows you to check the quality of your software components in different scopes. It can be production readiness, security, DORA metrics, anything that you feel like is a standard that you need to make sure your organization is complying with. Scorecards is a way for the portal to provide you automatic checks on different quality standards. As I said now, you bring the data into the catalog and ask the questions, and Port will automatically check whether your services, your cloud resources, your teams are answering the different standards you are requiring as an organization. And this is scorecards. And the last one is workflow automations, which allows you to automate stuff. For example, when there's a new incident, I want to send a Slack message to my team with all the information they need coming from Port automatically, without the intervention without human intervention in the middle. It's like self-service, but actually it's event-driven. Whenever something changes in the catalog, we want to trigger an automation that will actually perform, I don't know, escalation, create a new resource, revoke permissions, and so on. And these are the four main pillars. Since all these four are very enabling, we want to make sure that only the relevant people can see their resources, that not everyone can create a cloud resource, that not everyone can create a new repository. I want to make sure only the relevant personas are able to perform their daily routines. And we can do that using Port's role-based access control, RBAC, that is very granular and very specific, can be integrated with your Active Directory. And based on that, we can decide which experience the different personas will have in the portal. Every persona should see only the things that is relevant for their routines. And this is how we enforce it using RBAC and using customized dashboards that can show you dynamic information on top of your catalog. Only the services I own, only the services my VP, all data that is aggregated for my VP to see, and so on. Before I move on to building Port and the actual demo, I want to understand whether there are any questions in the audience regarding Port's pillar, regarding the things I just presented. Cool, so I see we don't have any questions. Let's move on. I'm going to move to the live demo. And what I'm going to do now in the live demo, I'm actually going to start from scratch. You're going to see an empty portal, and then we're going to install a few port integrations and see data coming into one catalog in a few minutes. During the demo, I'm going to understand how I built it and what everything represents behind the scenes in Port. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have regarding the building process. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and move to my Port environment. So this is Port. Welcome to Port. You can see here that we actually have an empty portal. Nothing is there, no self-service, no catalog. Everything is blank empty. And what I want to start with is to create a service catalog. Usually, a service is best represented by a Git repository. This is why we're going to install first the GitHub integration. So I'm just going to click here on the new data source, and I'm going to see that I have all these different integrations Port provides for you to install out of the box. Once I install an integration, Ports loads the current data in that third party. It can be repositories for GitHub, Argo CD applications, or a certain cloud resource. It doesn't matter. And then data is being updated in real time all the time. Port manages these integrations connectivity for you. For example, let's install the GitHub integration. Once I click on here, I'm going to install the integration. I have a two-factor authentication. I need to verify, of course. Oh, should be connected. So the data source is being installed. And now we can see status is done. I'll wait a few seconds and I should see data refreshed in the catalog, representing my repos and pull requests. The first step for my service catalog. Cool. So what we have here, first of all, we have a list of all of our services in one place coming from my Git repos. In my case, every repo represents a microservice. And I can see here the name of the service, the URL, the language, and some data that came out of the box. I can also see the pull requests. I don't have many for each repo. If I now step into a pull request, I can see it is connected to a certain service automatically. Okay? So this is it. I can also get out of the box a service dashboard showing the different languages we have in the organization, how many Python services we have, just as an example, and a quick dashboard showing me the current production readiness level in my organization. And this is just the first step. So this is just by installing the initial GitHub integration, bringing me data about repositories and pull requests. Second step, I want to also install the Jira integration. So I'm now going to click on the plus data source and do the same. I want to bring my Jira resources. I'm going to search for Jira over here. And here I can install ports, this port hosted integration. I choose my GitHub host. Give me 1 second to bring it. I have my Jira user and my Jira token loaded here as secrets. And I click on done, and the integration is going to be installed. It's being created now. And one more thing I want to do, I want to install my Kubernetes integration because I want to bring data about one of my Kubernetes clusters. So I can just click on the Kubernetes integration over here. And this one is not installed in port. It works in a push model. So I can install this deployment in my Kubernetes cluster. And data from this cluster will automatically be populated to my port instance. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just for a second go to my terminal, and I'm going to paste this script to my terminal. I just installed it, so we should wait a few seconds, and we should see it is being updated over here, and the status will be updated to done. So we can see it now and done, and we can see that now we have 3 data sources populating data in real time to my port catalog. We have the GitHub one we just started with. We have the Kubernetes integration that is now being populated, and we have the Jira one that is also being populated. Cool. So now if I go to the catalog, I can see we have a lot of pages created automatically for me, and the catalog is really shaping up. I can see the first pages from GitHub. I can see the Jira project and my Jira issues. And I can also see my Kubernetes workloads, my namespaces from Kubernetes, and so on. This is just the beginning of building this catalog import. We have some things to do, and it's not over yet. But this is just in a few seconds, in a few minutes, I would say, installing and connecting the portal to a free integration. And I think it's already pretty valuable. As for me as a developer, I already can see my GitHub information, my Jira, and my Kubernetes information in one unified place. So it's pretty easy for me to set it up. It's not connected yet. Like I don't have yet a connection between GitHub repository to the relevant Kubernetes workload and the Jira issues. It's something we can do, but it's a nice beginning for us to have pretty fast. Any questions? I'm going to start now for questions if you have regarding what I just built and how it's working. I guess there are some questions about the integration. So I'm going to wait a few seconds to let you guys post questions in our chat. Feel free. So I see we have 2 questions. Let's start with the first one by Sebastian. So how does it work when services are on-premise in my company? That's a great question. And by the way, Sebastian, when you say on-premise, I guess you mean that you have some sort of a self-hosted Git repository management or some sort of an on-premise service for managing these services. So I'm going to say that in Port, we have two type of integration. We have the ones that are SaaS, like the GitHub one or the Jira one, where you can actually host the integration in Port, and Port directly communicates with your environment. And we also have integrations that are considered on-premise or self-hosted. And one that we just installed is the Kubernetes exporter, where you install a certain integration in your environment, like the Kubernetes one, and it reports in a push model to our environment. Just like that, if you have a certain tool you're using in your on-premise environment, we can work in a push model. So we will give you deployment in Kubernetes to install, and the integration will report in a push model from your on-premise environment to the portal. I hope it answered the question. And I will be happy to, if you have any follow-up question on that, I will be happy to answer. One more question we have from an anonymous attendee is what is the data model on the sidebar? So I think it's related to this page. And this is a great opportunity for us to talk about what is the data model in Port and how it works and what is the blueprint. So once you install it, once you set up the portal, and this is a great point for us to talk about this builder page, which is like the admin page for you to manage the portal, right? And in this builder page, you can see that we have all these boxes and arrows. Each one of these boxes is called a blueprint. A blueprint is a resource type in Port, which helps you manage the life cycle of one resource in your organization. An example for one of these resources is the service blueprint, which we see here as a box. If we now extend this particular box, I can see that this service representation has a schema, different properties. Each one, I want it to represent, like this schema represent every service in my organization. I want it to have a README, a language, a Slack channel, and a URL to the Git repo to help me understand how can I start coding about coding this particular service. Just like that, if I now see this box here and I go back to the catalog, I can see that this schema is replicated here to the table in the software catalog automatically. For example, I can see that I have a README for every service. I have a language, I have a name coming from my Git repo, and a URL in GitHub helping me to get to my particular repo when I click here and I go to this particular repo. So this is the concept of ports data model. I can define what I want to see about every resource, the schema, and connect it to a certain data source. And in this case, my service information is coming from GitHub, but it can also come from GitLab, Azure DevOps, or Bitbucket as well. And one more question. How does those relate to automations, and what happens if you add a value? I'm not sure I got the question, but I'll try to, from what I understood, I try to explain a bit more. You want to read? So if I understand correctly, and by the way, feel free to add one more question to help us understand better the question. But I think that when you say how does this relate to automations, you mean how does this relate with automation of creating a new service, deploying a service, and how do I reflect that in the catalog? Yeah, so how those tie to the automation stuff that is available on the blueprint. Cool. So I want to talk about the blueprint for one more second. We have here, for each blueprint, we can represent its schema, like the catalog of every service. And I can also create self-service sections to perform on my services. For example, here we can see we can scaffold a new service, create a GitHub secret, send a reminder about my scorecards, delete a repository. And one more thing we have is we can create automations about my services over here. So for example, when I don't know, the owner of a service is updated, I want to update it on a dedicated Slack channel to make sure everyone now knows who is the owner of this particular microservice. So here I can define these automations. I can decide, for example, that there will be a webhook sent whenever there's a new service created. And this is just the beginning. We can basically trigger anything for every change in my services in the catalog. I hope it answered your question in the audience. Cool. So one more thing I want to do if we already have a few more minutes to work on our portal, let's organize it a bit. So let's create some folders. Let's create one called coding and coding my features, and add here the services and the pull requests, as well as my service dashboard. Let's add one more folder here and call it managing production or runtime management. Maybe it will be a better one. And add here my Kubernetes information. And let's add one more folder, forgot the cluster, and call it Plan My Day. And on this one, we're going to add the Jira tasks management and the Jira project. And again, this is a very basic beginning for a portal. We can get it to a much more complex state, but this is something we did in a few minutes. I see there's a question. Cool. So if I have a GitHub Enterprise and Jira self-hosted without internet access, I can deploy something in my private network to push information to port. Is it possible to deploy a port in my private network? And is it possible to deploy on Azure or AWS, which are the landing zone available in my company? That's a good question, but today port is a SaaS tool, which means that we cannot be installed on premise. The architecture of port is kind of hybrid, where the core of port is hosted in the cloud, and the integrations can be installed on premise and need to have connectivity to the internet and report to port's core engine. But today, port cannot be installed on premise. It is only a SaaS solution that you can use in the cloud. And this is the main situation currently in the portal. Great. Few more things I can do in my portal. I can now go to self-service and I can create a new repo. Once I click on create, I can give it a name and a new repository with the standards of my company will be created. I can also create a new GitHub secret, and I can also perform some day two operation on my application. I can promote a certain service to production. I can lock a service from deployment or unlock because maybe there's an incident. And I can also provide self-service for my developers for creating certain cloud resources, like creating an S3 bucket. All of these self-service actions can be connected to your automations as a platform team behind the scenes. For example, creating a new S3 bucket will trigger a Terraform pipeline that will create a new Terraform resource and create a pull request. Once the pull request is merged, it will be reflected automatically in the catalog. And this is how we can connect between the catalog and the self-service part for your developers, and everything can be managed in one place, in one portal. And this is the idea. So this is like the very first implementation of creating a portal in your organization in 20 minutes. Few next steps that I would do if it was my portal once I finished with these steps. I would create a connection between a service and its running environment. For example, I want to show for every service the workload that are running for this service. For example, where it is running in my Kubernetes environment. So what I can do, I can create a new relation between workload and service and call it service and connect it to the service blueprint. By doing that, I can see that an arrow has been created between the workload blueprint and a service, like a foreign key. Same thing I want to do regarding my Jira tasks. I want to say about the Jira task to which service it is related. So I'm doing the same thing. And by doing that, I can see that now both the Jira issue and the Kubernetes workload are connected to one service blueprint. So what we can do, if you already have conventions and labeling and so on, we can automatically map your labels from Kubernetes or your custom fields from Jira to automatically connect them with every service we see here in the portal. For the purpose of the demonstration, I'm going to just connect a few manually so you can see the potential of how you can see everything in one place. So I'm going to go to one of these tickets. I'm going to connect it to one of my services. Let's see, it is 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to do the same for one of my workloads. I'm going to connect it to one of my services. So 1, 2, 3. And now I can go to my service. And if I step into it, I can see in one place for each service the Jira issues that are open about it and the Kubernetes workload. If I now go to a graph view, I can also see that architecture automatically visualized for me. Now imagine that here we did it manually, but in your case, we can automatically check for Jira issues based on their metadata, which service is connected to them. And same for Kubernetes workload. If we know in the spec or by a certain naming convention, under which service this Kubernetes deployment is deployed, we can automatically create your architecture here in port and show every context the developers needs in one place. I can see the repo and I can see the related resources to this service architecture. Imagine that here we can also show cloud, we can also show PagerDuty incidents, and so on. And you can see it all in our live demo, actually. If I now go to my service catalog and I can see one of the services, so this is how it's going to look like at the end. I can see for each service, the running service, the pull request, the deployment, the Jira issues, my dependencies, my SonarQube issues, and I can also see the full architecture once everything is mapped out for me in one view. And it's super easy for me to understand the architecture of this particular service and how it is running. How can I even start working on it in one place, automatically mapped out for me using ports integration? Cool. So I talked a lot. I hope it covered the main purpose and how you get started with port. And I want to move back to the slides and show and talk about how you get started and how we recommend getting started on an IDP, because we understand it's a project that can take a few weeks or a few months. So we're going to go back to the slides. Second. So usually when we talk about where we should begin, we're trying to find the sweet spot between 3 points. We want to find a use case that is high value, high demand, and in some way easy to implement. For example, a great use case for self-service that we see in port is super simple, is the ability to request access to a certain cloud resource or to get permissions to a certain cloud resource in a click of a button. Why? Because the team is getting tons of tickets just for a cloud access. It's something that is pretty frequent. I mean, it's a few tickets a day. It's very, very repetitive. It's super simple. So it's high demand. The team needs to actually every time go and manually update Terraform files instead of working on high value automations, instead of working on something that will actually bring value to the entire organization. So automating that and providing that using self-service is high value. And eventually the automation is not that hard. I mean, we're just updating a certain field in Terraform, or we're just updating a certain API. So it's pretty easy to implement. This is why this use case is usually a pretty good use case to start with on the self-service aspect. In addition to some use cases that are talking about software catalog, for example. If we're talking about software catalog, a good use case can be in the area of releasing a new feature. How can we help our developers release a feature faster? When we know what are today's pain point, if we think that cloud and repositories and Jira in the same place will make them work faster because today they can't get that information easily, then we should do a service catalog focusing on these points. So this is what we usually recommend. We recommend thinking about something that is high value, high demand, and is pretty easy to implement, and focus on that, on the aspect of the product management approach. We want you to start with an MVP, a minimum viable product that is actually bringing some value, but not the entire thing. Get some feedback and come back and continue to the next use case once you are smarter than before. This is how we see it in port. We believe that a portal should have short feedback loop, and that you as a team should be able to update it fast and provide a better solution fast. This is why we actually build a portal, as you saw earlier, that is pretty easy to configure, that is pretty easy to change and to update, so that once something is coming for you and you want to, you get some feedback and you want to actually change it and to make it a better fit for your developers, you can just go to port, update some fields, install one more integration, and bring it back to the developers to check whether now it's good for them. And that is the whole vision. Cool. So this is I'm going to wrap the webinar now. It was super fun. Thank you for the interesting question. I want to leave a few more seconds for you to ask more questions about the whole thing, about port as a product, or anything else you think you want to know that we haven't touched. I want to say that since port is a very generic tool and the development lifecycle is super rich, what we just saw is just what we demonstrated is just one use case of tons of use cases that you can see in port, and we are happy to show more use cases, and some of them are also in our live demo that I just showed you. I see we have one more question here. Can you show where you can define automatic mapping between two blueprints? Sure. So I don't have it in my demo now. I do want to show you how you can get it from the docs, because I think this is more relevant for you to actually build it with port. I'm going to share my screen and show you one guide that showed you how to connect automatically resources between each other, specifically actually in Kubernetes. So I'm going to share my screen now. And this guide, I'm going to also share it in the chat, by the way, to the whole panel. So this guide is actually how you can connect between your services, like the repos, to their Kubernetes runtime. So you have everything you need here, how you install the Kubernetes integration, and then how you actually connect them in port. In the end, it is coming to the mapping itself, where we need to map the workloads to the actual services. And here, one thing we recommend is adding a label to your workload saying the port service is the name of the service. By doing that, we can automatically map the label from each workload and connect it with the relevant service using JQ and a mapping. For example, you can see here that the mapping we are going to use, this is the deployment example in Kubernetes. We can see that we have a label example here, port service, and this is my service name, awesome service. This is a service I want to connect it to in the catalog eventually. And then in the mapping itself, like how we map this data into port, we are going to have a place where we say, okay, for each workload, for each deployment in my Kubernetes environment, I want the service you connected to be the service that is mentioned under this label. So basically, we are leveraging your naming convention, your labels, your tags, to automatically create this connection. If that was too fast, I really recommend going over this guide and going up point by point. I believe it will cover most of the open questions regarding how you can connect between two blueprints. Sebastian, feel free to say if it answered your question or you have any other follow-up questions after that. Cool. One more thing I want to share is the live demo address. Very useful for you to take inspiration from, to copy. The demo is aligned with our best practices for building a portal. So the configuration there, the blueprints, the data model should be there just like you do it in your environment based on your tech stack. I'm sharing here the link also in the Zoom chat, and I encourage you to actually go check it out, go to some more advanced use cases and try to navigate over the different pages you have there in the different self-service actions. Don't be shy. Feel free to click on everything, to test everything. This is exactly what it's meant for. And if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to wrap it. I want to thank you so much for listening to this live stream. I really enjoyed it. And we will be happy to answer any other questions in our Slack community. I'm there, Jenny is there. So we'll be happy to answer. Feel free to DM me. Just send me a question. If you want me to give you some technical support on the fly and you have any questions after this session, I'm your guy. And I will be happy to help you with any other thoughts you have about port. I would also be happy to get some feedback. Thank you so much. Have a great day and hope you enjoy your port experience in the future.